Right, so I don't usually do videos like this, and that makes it sound like I'm gonna talk about something serious here, and I'm not. I'm actually talking about a novel today, which I haven't actually sat and read a novel since I was in school. So since like 2013, I think, maybe 2014. And so I was just thinking, I read a lot of comics for this channel, and also because I just like comics in general. I wouldn't have made a channel devoted to that if I wasn't already deeply invested in that medium anyways. However, I don't read novels usually, and I wanted to change that because, there's a whole different thing reading a comic book series than reading a novel, obviously. So I wanted to get into a series, and I thought I liked The Witcher show on Netflix. I'm a bit so-so on the games, or on The Witcher 3 anyway, which is the only one I've actually played. I just couldn't get into it. I know a lot of people really love that game and that series and that franchise. I couldn't get into it. I liked most of the show. The first two seasons were great, and the third season is chaotic at best. So I wanted to read something, and I saw that this was here, and this was Waterstones, my closest Waterstones, and I assumed it's saying introducing The Witcher. I assumed that meant this is the first book in the series. What I didn't realise is that this was going to be a collection of short stories rather than the first in an ongoing saga. I thought jumping into this would be like jumping into like the first Harry Potter book, or jumping into the first, and it kind of is. It does contextualise the world that you're going to be jumping into, and it does kind of introduce you to all of the characters that are going to be main players going forward. Apart from Ciri's not in this. This takes place before Ciri is even born, and there is one of the stories in this that does kind of lead into Ciri's birth, and that story is probably the worst one in the book because it just drags on for so long and nothing really happens in it. But yeah, I went into this not knowing what it was, and knowing what it is now kind of makes the first series of the Netflix show make sense as to why it's structured the way it is, because this is structured in a way that's similar. But what I think is that the first season of the show is this book, or it's stories from this book and stories from the Sword of Destiny, which I know going into that to expect a short story compilation with a through line. And the through line with this is, in the first story that we're told, which is actually the most recent canonically, Geralt gets injured in a fight with a monster, and he seeks healing at this like temple of magicians and wizards and witches, and we actually opened the book on Geralt waking from consciousness to a pair of boobs in his face, which were like, oh yeah, now we get the kind of book that this is. And it's not all that. Very little of the book is that, actually. But that being your introduction kind of is like, oh, that's the kind of character that Geralt is, and that's kind of the world that we're living in. And that goes into my like one criticism, apart from some things in the book dragging on a bit. Like whenever there's a conversation, it feels like whenever there's an action sequence, those don't go on for long enough. And maybe this is something that happens in books in general. Maybe I'm just used to the pacing of a comic book, but it feels like an action sequence, and when they happen in here, it's great. Like the climax of the book with Yennefer and Geralt kind of having this brawl while a djinn is destroying this town around them, is great, and it's told really well. I don't know how to review books, so I'm not really going to try and review this. I am recommending it, obviously, and I'll do subsequent videos on the rest of the series as and when I get it read. But yeah, the big thing for me about this book, is for a book that's so kind of forward thinking in the things that it has to say about like xenophobia and racism in that kind of way, and it is very much like it does very much like lay to bear as like the Witcher and witches in general and like elves are kind of an analogue in this book as like ethnic minorities in real life, especially with this book being written in the 90s and coming out in the 90s. That would have been it's still extremely relevant now, as we've seen from the last like couple of weeks. It's incredibly relevant now, and it's also relevant then. I guess that's why this was translated to a Netflix series, because the themes in it are still relevant. The one thing that I do criticize the book on, and I know that this is an ongoing issue with the series in general, is its treatment of women, and the way that women, not all female characters in the book are overtly sexualized, but enough of them are for it to be a bit of a problem. For it to just feel like whenever there's a female character that's introduced and you're reading about how attractive they are and how shapely their bodies are and this, that and the other, and it is very awkward to read, especially when they're describing who is going to be Ciri's mum, who is the queen something or others. I cannot for the life of me remember the queen's name, but the queen's daughter is described to be extremely attractive, with a load of men fighting for her, and this guy who has made a surprise deal with her father that he will get her hand in marriage if he saves her father's life, and he did, so he is owed that. But the Queen's daughter is 15, and she's being described in this like overtly sexualized way with a load of men fawning over her, and stuff like that. It's like one instance in the book, and it is very awkward to read. It's just weird. And I get that this is a book that came out in the 90s, attitudes towards women were completely different then. And it is just weird with a book that is so, or with a story in general that is so forward-thinking when, and has something to say about xenophobia and has something to say about racism. And it's forward-thinking in that aspect, and it has something to say there, but its attitude towards women and the description of several female characters in the book is so of a time and of an era that is just hard to read at some points, and it's one of the things that is kind of making me want to take a bit of a break between reading this one and reading the next one. Obviously, when Yennefer's introduced, it does describe her to be attractive as well, and smelling of lilac and gooseberries. That, I think it says lilac and gooseberries more than any other part of the book, and Yennefer only shows up in like the last 50 pages of the book. She's not in the book for that long, and her story intrinsically like leans into why the book is called The Last Wish, and the story that she's in is actually called The Last Wish as well, and it deals with like a genie type monster that grants like 3 wishes, but it doesn't want you to grant the wishes, and will try and kill you before you have a chance to wish anything, and it won't do your wish in a way that you want it to. You have to kind of describe it in immense detail, which obviously the amount of time that takes, it would have killed you anyway. But yeah, I like most of the book. I like most of it, but some things in it are just things that are better left in the 90s, and things that are better left in a bygone era. I like most of it. I like most of the book, and I'm excited to see where this dovetails into when it comes to the actual series. And the reason why I started reading this after watching the show is I want to see the differences, and I want to see most notably, I want to see what it was in the book that the show didn't do that made Henry Cavill leave. I want to see what that's all about, because this is there's parts in this where episodes in the show are literally play-by-plays of this, but the show is also very out of order in terms of where things happen in the book and when they happen in the show. The second short story in this, which you'd think would be then episode 2 of the show, no. The second like story in this is like an episode from season 3, I think, which is weird. And in that story, there is no Yennefer, there is no Ciri. It's just Geralt going to this like castle with like a beast there, and he needs to find a woman to fall in love with him so that he can turn back into a bloke. It's like a lot of the stories in this are kind of like dark Black Mirror versions of fairy tales and things from the past. Like they're Black Mirror fairy tales, and that is the most interesting part of the book. Is like turning this otherwise innocent story into something that is very like dark, and that is where I feel like the series in the book is at its most interesting. So that's where I stand on. I don't know how to say the bloke's name. Is it Andrzej or is it Andrzej Sapkowski? Let me know in the comments below how to say the author's name, because I'm going to be saying it a lot over the next, like, as I work my way through this series. I did like this. I don't want it to come across as though I didn't like this. I did like this. It's just some things in it are are very difficult to get through, and the language in it is, something that I'm going to have to get used to. People talk in a way that's very roundabout, and they take a paragraph to say something that could be said in a few words, and that kind of irritates me a little bit. Again, it's a different thing going from reading comic books for the last 13 years to reading a novel, and it's written in a completely different way. But I did like this. But I'm more excited to get into the books that are just telling a story from A to B, and not, as much as these short stories are good, and not all of them are great. I'd say it opens with its best and it ends with its best as well. It opens really strong. The ones in the middle are a little bit of a slog to get through, especially the direct middle portions of the book are a slog to get through. And then you've got the last story, which is, no holds barred. That is the real, like as soon as it introduces Yennefer, the book turns from being very slow and methodical to being like, oh, we're in an action sequence for the rest of the book now. And from that point on, basically the whole of the last portion of the book, I couldn't put it down. So if that's not a good sign, I don't know what is. Anyways, that is The Witcher: The Last Wish. If you have read this yourself, which I don't know if anyone watching this has, but if this is coming up in your feed, you probably have read this. Let me know in the comments below what you think of it. I like it. I recommend reading it if you are into stuff like this, and especially if you liked the show and like the games. But do be prepared and go into it knowing that some of the descriptions of female characters are a bit cringeworthy. That's kind of it. I'll see you guys in the next video. I have a lot of comic book stuff to talk about going forward. There's a Disney Speedstorm thing that I've got to talk about. That game is annoying me yet again. But that's it for today's video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.